Welcome back to our third class. Today we're going to be looking at Hebrews chapter 2, verses 5 to 18. Really incredible stuff today. We have the transition from the angels to Jesus. We're learning about Jesus's humiliation, his glorification, and then his solidarity with us as humans and why that's important. And so we start off with the writer saying it was not to the angels that God subjected the world to come. So this world to come, we see it three different times in Hebrews. It's world to come here, then age to come later, and then city to come at the end, which just signifies the new heavens and the new earth. And he quotes then from Psalm chapter 8, verses 4 to 6. This incredible quote about Jesus. What is man that you are mindful of, or the Son of Man that you care for him? You made him, and this is like a confession of faith here, these three verses. They go over the incarnation, exaltation, and final victory, these three lines. You made him for a little while lower than the angels, that's his incarnation. Then you crowned him with glory and honor, that's his exaltation. And then you putting everything in subjection under his feet. That's his final victory. And so each of these three things, his incarnation, making him lower than the angels, his glory and honor, and then making everything in subjection under his feet, the preacher is going to then expound on what each and every one of those means in his next paragraph. He says, now putting everything in subjection to him, he left nothing outside of his control. This is more Christology. So everything is subject to Christ. So that's what it means by everything being subject to him. And then at the end of that paragraph, it's not just everything that's subject to him, but it is that he did what he did so that the grace of God would be given to everyone. So everything is subject to him. He tasted death so that the grace of God would be given to everyone. And we have that kind of beginning, starting with everything and ending with everyone in this. At present, we do not see everything in subjection to him. So just a reminder of, yes, everything, all his enemies, as we read yesterday in last class, that everything would be subject, all his enemies would be put under his feet in Psalm 110, verse 1. But not everything and all his enemies are yet there. On the final day, death and sin are the two final enemies to be conquered. They will be put under his feet, and then the kind of new age starts with the new heavens and the new earth when we get our new bodies. And so everything is subject to him, but not everything is yet subject to him. So this is this concept that we see in the Gospels, that the kingdom is here, but not yet. We see elements of the kingdom here. We see God's rule. We see God's reign, but it's not total. It's not complete yet. But we see for him who is made a little while lower than the angels, namely Jesus. So this is the first time we get Jesus' name here. He is the one that we've been talking about, the Son of Man here in the quotation from Psalm chapter 8, but also the Son that we've been talking to all throughout chapter 1. Who was made a little bit lower than the angels. That was his period of incarnation when he took on human flesh and was given the name Jesus. So Jesus was never his name before. So whenever we talk about Jesus in the New Testament, the New Testament authors are generally referring to the incarnation, the human flesh form of Jesus. And then he was crowned with glory and honor because of the suffering of death. And so again, crowned with glory and honor, lower than the angels, subjection under his feet, all lines that the preacher is pulling from Psalm chapter 8, verses 4 to 6. And so the reason why Jesus was crowned with glory and honor, his exaltation, his glorification, was because he suffered death. And so through his humiliation, he humbled himself, God glorified him or exalted him after his death. We see this pattern with so many things. I think the easiest way to see it is with marriage, where we are called to humble ourselves to our spouse, and our spouse exalts us. When husbands serve their wife, they humble themselves, and the wife submits to her husband, she exalts him. When the wife submits to her husband, she humbles herself. When the husband clothes her with righteousness and washes her with the word, he exalts her. And when he serves her, he exalts her. And so we see that's how it works in the kingdom, that we humble ourselves, we are exalted by someone else. God exalts Jesus because of the suffering of death. And why did he suffer death? So that he might taste death for everyone. So I love this word taste because it just talks about when you taste something, you don't experience it fully. Jesus didn't fully get the gamut of death because he conquered it, right? So when we die, we are dead. When Jesus died, he only tasted it. He was dead for 3 days. And so this paragraph now gives color to the psalm. We understand more about Jesus, and the reason why we need to understand and kind of expand our Christology is because of this next points that the writer is going to make. So he says, "For it was fitting that he, for whom and by whom all things exist, and bringing many sons to glory, should make the founder of their salvation perfect through suffering." This is such a loaded sentence. It is giving the founder word here. I'm reading from the ESV translation for all of this, and so you may be reading from a different translation. Most likely you have a different word. This word it's translated so many different ways. It's a harder word to understand, but what I have landed on is the best way to understand this is how we see this word used more broadly throughout Greek culture. We know that the writer of Hebrews was very well read, very well educated, and so this word was more broadly used as champion. And so if he is the champion of our salvation, we realize that in the aspect of champion is a little bit different than we would think now how that word was used. It was more used in the Bronze Age when two armies would come to fight each other. Sometimes they wouldn't fight each other head on. Instead, each army would send out a champion. You see this in the movie Troy when Brad Pitt goes out to fight the champion in the beginning of the movie of the other army. He kills him, and so they avoid bloodshed of the entire army, and then the spoils of war go to the champion winner. In the Bible, we see this in David and Goliath, when Goliath, the champion of the Philistines, is standing out waiting for a champion of Israel to emerge, and who emerges? David emerges. When he kills Goliath, Israel has victory over the Philistines. And so here we see that the champion is Jesus, and who is Jesus fighting? We go on later in this text. Right after all the quotations, it says that through death he might destroy the one who has power of death, that is the devil. And so we see that the champion of death is the devil. Our champion is Jesus. And when they fight, who wins? Jesus. Why? Because he conquers death. He conquers the devil. And so when he conquers the champion, he now gets all the spoils of war. He has won. And in him winning, what all of this is bringing to, we have to read the next couple of lines if we go back to him being the champion of our salvation, perfected through suffering. For he who sanctifies and those who are sanctified all have one source. That is why he is not ashamed to call them brothers. So this kind of point that the writer is getting to is how Jesus, now again, we're using that name Jesus because that's his incarnational name. Jesus is not ashamed to identify with us as human beings, as our brother. He is not ashamed to call you brother, call you sister. He came out from among us. And so the author uses all of these different proofs. He quotes from Psalm chapter 22, verse 22, then Isaiah chapter 18, Isaiah chapter 8, verse 17, and then Isaiah chapter 8, verse 18. And these proofs are, the first one is, I will tell of your name to my brothers in the midst of the congregation. I will sing your praise. So the first one is that he is in the midst of the congregation. He is in the midst of the people, and he will tell of the name of God to all of his brothers. He is one of us, to all of his family. And again, I will put my trust in him, Isaiah 8:18. So when he is saying he'll put his hope or trust in God, he's saying just like we have to put our hope in God, he had to put his hope, his trust in God. Right? When he went to the cross, his faith led him to death. His trust in God in the Garden of Gethsemane, when he didn't want to go to the cross, but he said, not my will, your will be done. That was him trusting in God. Just like you and I have to put our trust in God. We have to say, not our will, your will be done. We think we know it's better. We have things that we want. We have desires. We have goals. But we lay all that aside and we say, I will put my trust in him. And then the third one, Isaiah 8:18, behold, I and the children God has given me. Again, he's identifying with the children of God. I and the children God has given me. He is one of them. And so all these show why Jesus wasn't ashamed. He's not ashamed because we exist through him. We exist for him. He brought us to glory. So when he goes to God, he brings all of us with him, bringing, it says, many sons to glory. He brings us with him to him. Our sanctification that we receive is of the same source, that of the one who sanctifies. So it all comes from the same place, meaning there is nothing for him to be ashamed of. And so when we come to this realization that Jesus, incarnational Jesus, is one of us, came from us, is our champion, is not ashamed of us, brings us to God in glory, sanctifies us from the same source, then we get since therefore. We get two therefores in this paragraph. So there's two conclusions that the preacher wants you to have. Since therefore, and he reiterates the point, that the children share in the flesh and blood, he himself likewise partook of the same things, that through death he might destroy the one who has power of death, that is the devil, and deliver all those who through fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery. For surely it is not angels that he helps, but he helps the offspring of Abraham. So the first thing he wants you to understand is that Jesus shared in flesh and blood with you. He partook of the same things. He suffers with us. Why? He did this so that he would destroy death. And he didn't do this to help angels. He did this to help the children of Abraham, who Paul says, through faith, you and I in Galatians are children of Abraham. We are now of Abraham's offspring. And because of that, are grafted into the promise of Abraham. And so the first thing that he wants you to understand is Jesus shared in all of this, conquered death as one of us, so that he will help us, the children of Abraham. And then the second point that he is going to emphatically make here is he had to be made like his brothers in every respect. All right, so the first point is he was like us. Second point is he had to be made like us. Why? So that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in the service of God to make propitiations for our sins. And so he was one of us, became like us so that he could be a merciful and faithful high priest. But then the high priest, if you read in the Levitical system, who was the one who practiced the Day of Atonement, who's the apex pinnacle of the Torah, lands you in Leviticus 16, which goes over the Day of Atonement, which gives you the job of the high priest, who they had one day a year, had to make atonement for all the people of Israel. So Jesus's qualification for high priest was that he came out from among us so that he can be merciful and faithful in his role as high priest. Why? Because he himself has suffered when tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted. So because he goes through all of this, because he goes through this, because he is tempted like us, because he suffered like we suffer, now as our high priest, he is able to help us in our suffering when we are being tempted. He is not one that doesn't understand this, doesn't know it. He knows it well, and because he knows it well, he is able to help us. This is a promise that we have. And so the Son of God shares in our situation, conquers the situation, and because he conquers it, is able to come out of it as a high priest who sanctifies us, who is merciful and faithful in his role to help us through our temptation. So when you have temptation, you now know that we have a faithful high priest who is able to help us. And remember that this house church, they had a fear of death. The next persecution that was going to happen, they had lost their stuff. We're going to read about that later. They were losing their material possessions. Now their life was in threat. And the encouragement here is that Jesus delivered all those who through fear of death were being subject to lifelong slavery. If you realize that when you are afraid of death, it is the greatest fear. It is where all phobias come from. That you make decisions based off of that fear. And if you've ever had a phobia, you are a slave to that fear. And so you make poor decisions because of that phobia, because you are scared of death. But now the author is saying that because Jesus has conquered death, he has released us of this fear. He has released us of our phobias so that now we can make the right decision. And it's not like he doesn't understand how hard it is when we are tempted and we want to make bad decisions because of fear of death. No, he understands that because he went through the suffering. He actually died. And so now he was able to help us in our temptations when we want to make bad decisions because of our slavery towards the fear of death, which is all the bad fear that we have in the world that we make decisions, fear of man, fear of whatever it is. So whatever fears you are bringing to your decision making, realize that Jesus frees you of it. He went through the worst. He already died. So what worse fear could you have? You can have none. He frees you from it. And he is a faithful and merciful high priest to help you through it. That is really good news. Thanks for joining me today. I'll see you in our next class to continue to develop how great Jesus is.